I died. I think that was the question that echoed most in my head after what I experienced that day, but that wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part was what Jesus showed me afterward. Nobody expected all of Mexico to grind to a halt overnight. I always thought a tragedy of that magnitude was something out of a movie, something from the news in another country, but in 2026, it was different. Chaos arrived for everyone without warning. It was a normal morning, already quite hot. Early in the day, people were going to work, children to school, everything at the same pace as always. I was standing in line at the bakery with my phone in my hand when suddenly everything went dark. It wasn't just the light that disappeared, it was everything, the signal, the internet, the water, everything was gone. First came the silence, then the fear. I heard people screaming in the street, cars stopped in the middle of traffic, sirens that went nowhere. I looked around and saw people running looking for a sign, others simply standing, not knowing what to do. It was then that I began to feel an oppression that wouldn't go away. I thought of my daughter at school, my parents at home, all those who didn't know where they were. Time felt strange, it seemed to have stopped. No one had an answer, only that dense emptiness in the air. In the midst of this chaos, I felt my body weaken, everything went completely dark. I don't know if I fainted, if I died for a moment. I only remember leaving, looking at the lost crowd in the streets of Mexico City. I saw despair in everyone's eyes, but then, in the midst of that darkness, a different light appeared. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a delusion, it was real. It was then that he appeared. Jesus looked at me in the most direct way I had ever felt. He didn't speak eloquently. He didn't speak in parables. He simply said, "You're not finished yet. There are serious things to see and serious things to tell." I felt an urgency in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Jesus showed me what no one wanted to see. The danger wasn't just the chaos in the streets, but the indifference, the coldness, the senseless rush of before, still present, trying to save themselves. Desperate people, separated families, friends fighting over water and bread. He said, "The enemy will no longer intimidate, he will seduce, he will make everything seem easy, comfortable, and therein lies the danger." This warning hammered in my head. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. It was to tell you what I saw, and if you hear it now, it's because this warning is also for you. It's not a made-up story. I saw it, I felt it. Jesus showed me and told me to speak plainly, without embellishment. It's time to wake up. After that day, nothing returned to normal. It was as if all of Mexico had plunged into another era, a kind of desert where everything was lacking and no one knew what would happen. The next minute the heat intensified, but there were no fans, no cold water, no hope of help. The supermarket shelves were empty in 2 days, money lost its value, credit cards and the apps were useless. Those who had food at home became the target of their neighbors' suspicions. The nights were even worse, without electricity, without the noise of cars, without television, without news from the outside world. The only sounds were those of people trying to sleep, crying softly, praying aloud, or the sirens that sometimes still wailed in the darkness. People of all faiths, of all kinds, now equal, feeling afraid and ashamed to ask for help. There were times when I wanted to disappear, close my eyes, and wait to wake up in a different world. I started seeing neighbors who had never spoken to me knocking on my door to ask if I had rice, water, or candles. I lost count myself of the times I stood in line just to get a bucket of water from the tanker truck that appeared every now and then. People tried to organize themselves, but fights soon broke out. No one had patience. Everyone wanted to solve things on their own. Each person was fighting for themselves. The worst part was feeling the city empty and heavy at the same time, as if everyone were carrying an old guilt, a fear hidden for years. I looked at my daughter and tried to give her strength, but she sensed it. Children can sense when their mothers are pretending to be calm. I had no answer, only that question, why all this now? In the middle of one of those long nights, when everyone seemed to have given up, that presence returned. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't madness, it was as if time had stopped. I felt Jesus nearby, looking at me as he had the first day. He didn't come with an explanation or the promise of an easy solution. He simply said, "It's not just a lack of light, water, or food. The emptiness is inside. If you don't wake up now, when will you?" That message kept swirling in my head. It wasn't just for me, it was for all of Mexico, and I understood. The greatest darkness wasn't outside, it was the time we spent living without truly caring about those around us. As the days passed, what hurt me most wasn't the hunger or the thirst, it was the silence. Mexico City, accustomed to noise and movement, now seemed like a ghost town. I heard children crying in the building across the street, dogs howling at night, but there was no more music or laughter in the streets. People began to speak more quietly, as if afraid of attracting attention or disturbing their neighbors. Everyone began to suspect something was amiss. Before, simply walking down the street was enough to feel life. People selling fruit, packed buses, street vendors shouting. Now, the little that could be seen was people walking quickly, heads bowed, thinking only of getting home quickly with something to eat. The fear was so great that we even hid the candlelight so as not to attract attention. I felt that suddenly each of us had become an island. Meanwhile, word spread, no one really knew what was happening outside. Some said it was a punishment, others spoke of war, a virus, an invasion, but no one knew for sure. What everyone felt was that they could no longer rely solely on the government, the police, or the promises of politicians. Each person had to look out for themselves. His own. The feeling of abandonment was intense. One day I tried to gather the people in the building to share the last bottles of water. At first, they agreed, but then came the distrust, the fights, the arguments. It seemed that everyone had forgotten how to trust. It was strange to see longtime friends looking at each other with suspicion, neighbors making up stories, families fighting over trivial matters. The hunger wasn't just for food, it was for security, for hugs, for hope. It was one of those days, when I was already thinking of giving up on everything. When his presence returned, Jesus didn't show me an easy way out, nor an instant miracle. He simply looked at me, in a way that only those who have lived it understand, and said, "True life only begins when you learn to be there for each other, not against each other." It wasn't about religion or rituals. It was about looking into the eyes of the person next to you and sharing what little you have, even with fear. That's when I understood, Mexico lacked not only energy but also unity, and until we learned to take care of each other, nothing would change. The days went by, each one seeming longer than the last. We got used to the darkness, to rationed food, to bucket toilets, to washing clothes in the makeshift tub in the building's courtyard. Those with large families learned to truly share. Those who lived alone learned to ask for help. I had never seen so many people swallowing their pride to knock on a neighbor's door, to offer or ask for a piece of bread. What impressed me most was seeing children playing with bottle caps, laughing amidst the chaos, teaching adults not to lose their minds. One day, a group of young people went out into the street to collect rainwater to share with those who couldn't leave their homes. It wasn't charity on social media, it was necessity, a genuine struggle for survival. And yet, there were still those who frowned, who hid behind their doors, afraid of losing what little they had managed to save. Gradually, routine turned into improvisation, coffee became a luxury, meat disappeared from the plates, as did fruit. Only occasionally did people learn to cook with what they had. Even those who had never prayed began to ask for strength. Churches were packed at first, but soon closed for fear of chaos, theft, and disorder. People continued to pray at home, in the dark, each in their own way. I had never seen so much quiet prayer. I began to understand that true faith appears even when everything else has failed. It disappears when there's no church service, no music, no preaching. It's just you and God there in the darkness, speaking softly, asking only for the basics, peace to sleep, food so your child doesn't go hungry, hope to endure one more day. It was one of those tired nights, my body aching from trying so hard to help, that I felt that presence again. It wasn't a scare, it wasn't a dream, it was Jesus there beside me. He didn't promise the end of suffering, riches, or an easy miracle. He simply said, Now you understand the value of being together, of being family, of being neighbors, of being human." That stayed with me during those days. All of Mexico became a dark room, filled with people praying together, each in their own home, immersed in the same despair, but learning the hard way that no one can bear it alone, and if all this didn't awaken people's hearts, nothing else would. At first, many thought that if they waited a few days everything would return to normal, but the days turned into weeks, food ran out, water was rationed, even the candles began to disappear from the houses. Fear intensified. Some tried to leave the city, but the roads were blocked. There was no gasoline and no news. Who had distant relatives? They didn't know if they were alive. The radio sometimes picked up a voice, always with bad news. I had never seen people so lost. The worst thing was seeing the elderly suffer. Grandma, who had always been strong, now wept in secret, missing her grandchildren. The days when everything was simple, children asking when the electricity would return, mothers lying so as not to frighten them. There were nights when hunger was so great that people divided broken cookies into 4 pieces. In those moments, faith seemed weak, but it was all that remained. In the midst of all this, small groups began to emerge, trying to cheer up the neighborhood. People sang in the yard, neighbors prepared communal soup, 1 or 2 told stories to distract the children. I saw people sharing what they had, even with the fear of being left with nothing. I later discovered that when hope fades, kindness grows. It wasn't charity to show off, it was the act of those who can't bear to see others fall. I found myself helping people I barely knew. One night I gave my last can of corn to my sick neighbor, without thinking about tomorrow. My heart aches, but afterward comes a peace that's hard to explain. We learn that sometimes a miracle is simply sharing the little we have and that God uses our own hands in those moments. It was then that I felt Jesus closer. He didn't come with a thunderous voice or a grand vision, he simply awakened a feeling. Hold on a little longer, don't let go of anyone's hand. I understood that hope is like that, simple, almost invisible, but it's what gets us out of bed the next day, even without certainty. Those who stood firm during those difficult days were those who believed it was worthwhile to help, even without seeing any reward. In the end, that was the lesson when everything falls apart. What truly saves us is the courage not to turn our backs on others, and that was what made the difference when hope seemed too small. The forced cohabitation confronted us with our true selves. Old conflicts we had been hiding resurfaced. There were families who never spoke to each other and were now forced to sit together, look each other in the eye, and share what little they had left. Couples fought, siblings argued, friendships broke down over trivial matters, but I also saw people reconcile after years of silence, simply because fear was stronger than pride. I learned that in desperation, no one can hide their weakness. Masks fall away, the generous became even more generous, the stingy showed it without shame. I saw a neighbor who never greeted anyone opening his door to distribute bread, and I saw good people hiding food for fear of running out. Chaos brings out the best and worst in everyone. We always think we'll know how to act when a crisis hits, but in that moment, many were paralyzed. There were adults crying like children, young people who had never prayed asking for prayers, community leaders disappearing in difficult times. In those moments, only faith kept them together, but not a faint faith or a ritualistic faith. It was fundamental faith, asking God for strength to get through one more day. I myself had to swallow my pride and accept help from people I never liked. One night I could only sleep because a neighbor came to share her last package of cookies. In such a moment, do you see that deep down we are all the same? Hunger, fear, longing, the will to survive. What stuck with me was that in the end, God uses every situation to reveal what we hide. Jesus' words made more and more sense each day. It's not just about surviving, it's about learning to be human. It is in the darkness that you recognize who truly has light. When all this is over, I know that no one will ever be the same. The strongest lesson I've learned is, it's no use having a lot if you don't know how to share it, and it's no use saying you have faith if you've never truly lived it. In moments of pain, amidst so many difficulties, I began to see small miracles that had previously gone unnoticed. One day, suddenly, an old truck appeared, bringing golden bread from a bakery on the other side of town. Everyone ran, but no one fought. People who had never even looked at each other on the street were now sharing food, laughing, and telling stories to distract the children. I also saw simple acts of solidarity, like a child who gave his own toy to a younger classmate to stop him from crying. A woman sewed masks from old sheets for those who needed to go out to get water. I saw people forming lines without police, dividing up the time in front of the fountain so that each family could get only what they needed. It wasn't charity for photos, it was simply the desire to help. It was there that I understood that hope is born from these little things. When everything else is lacking, what remains is attitude. I discovered a strength within me that I didn't even know existed. I also discovered that asking for help is nothing to be ashamed of. On the contrary, it unites people, provides relief, and calms the heart. I began to be grateful every day for things that before I didn't even care about: sleeping with my family, hearing conversations, smelling simple food, sharing a coffee. The essential things gained value, and my faith, although weakened, returned little by little, like someone getting up from a bad fall. At that moment, my prayer changed. It was no longer about God getting us out of trouble, but about Him giving us strength to endure and sensitivity so as not to be paralyzed. I asked Jesus not to let me forget the lesson when things got better. His message was clear: sometimes a miracle is simply seeing the other person and extending a hand, and that true hope is learned in difficult times. When I think about that moment, I see that pain united those who were never meant to be together, and it was in the simplest gestures that God showed He still cares for us, even when everything seems over. After living on the edge for so long, I began to see that even in the worst of times, faith slowly returns to the hearts of those who don't give up. Those who once only complained, now gave thanks for the little they had. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other began to share stories, food, and even tight hugs when they cried. The fear didn't disappear, but it gave way to a trust that no longer depends on what you see, but on what you feel inside. One day, in the middle of one of those impromptu conversations in the building's courtyard, someone began to say, "Let's pray." No one looked at each other suspiciously, no one found it strange. Everyone was quiet, heads bowed, speaking softly to God as they knew how. There was no sermon nor elaborate speech, just a group of tired people, with the hope of a new day. These moments united people, even in their suffering. Those who were once ashamed to show weakness began to ask for prayer. There were children praying for their parents, mothers praying for their children, even neighbors praying for people they had never met. This changed the depressing atmosphere of the place. Mistrust gave way to affection, respect, and a desire to help. Faith became practical. It was about seeing who needed it most and sharing what little they had. It was about getting up early to fetch water, not just for themselves, but also for the elderly man on the 5th floor. It was about sharing medicine, bread, hope. No one became a saint, no one became perfect, but everyone learned that God uses our hands to comfort those around us. I also learned to pray differently. I stopped asking for explanations and began to give thanks for enduring another day. I began to ask not to lose compassion, not I didn't want to become bitter. Even with all the difficulties, I understood that faith in these moments is what keeps us from collapsing inside. In the end, the habitual faith that only appeared on Mass days or in memorized prayers became the faith of a survivor, a trust without preconceived answers, but full of hope, even when everything seemed dark. That's how I gradually began to believe that there was still a way, not just for me, but for all of Mexico. After living in darkness for so long, you learn to appreciate the simple things: the sun streaming through the window, a sip of clean water, hot food, a quiet conversation. I saw many people change, lose their fear of asking for help, learn to share shamelessly. The crisis was hard, but it also served to show who people truly were. As the months passed, what stood out most wasn't the hunger or the thirst, it was the way people began to see each other. Suddenly, neighbors became friends, people who were once invisible became part of the family, children began to care for the elderly, Young people taught adults how to improvise, and the elderly became everyone's advisors. When things finally began to improve, with electricity slowly returning, water arriving, and markets gradually reopening, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The scars remained. Those who were hungry no longer wasted food. Those who were alone learned to visit, to ask if the other person was okay. Those who initially shut themselves away, over time, they learned to open their doors. The most important thing was seeing that faith no longer depends on habit or a full church. Faith has become an attitude, a gesture of compassion, a word of comfort, a sincere, even simple, prayer. I saw people giving thanks for everything, even for suffering, simply for being alive and having someone with whom to share their lives. In this New Mexico, I learned that the greatest miracle is not a magic solution, but a transformed heart. I understood that Jesus had already warned us that when the worst happens, we either close ourselves off completely or we learn to truly love, and that sometimes God allows the long night to teach us the value of the sun when it returns. In the end, what remained was this: the certainty that no one can endure alone and that true hope is built day by day, even if slowly, even with fear. If you have lived through all of this and still feel a tightness in your chest, don't forget it. Even in the darkness, God is working to bring something new. When life slowly returned to normal, everything seemed slower. The traffic was no longer the same, the hustle and bustle disappeared, people looked at each other more on the street, many businesses closed permanently, others opened without so much haste, schools reopened, but now parents stayed closer to their children, afraid of losing them again. Many couldn't take it anymore and left the city in search of a quieter, safer place. I learned that starting over is not a celebration, it is slow, timid, sometimes doubtful, sometimes angry about what was lost. Many things cannot be undone. People died, houses collapsed, jobs disappeared, money never had the same value again. But in the midst of this new beginning, I saw that many things became more valuable: shared time, shared bread, prayers offered with open hearts, churches reopened, but they were different. There wasn't so much formality anymore. Nobody cared about clothes, chairs, or schedules. People went to give thanks, we cried together, we listened to the stories of the survivors. The service became a gathering of people marked by their own experiences, people grateful simply for having gone through it all together. It wasn't about religion, it was about comfort. Jesus' message became even clearer: don't lose the lesson, don't go back to autopilot. I had warned that the greatest danger was getting used to the emptiness. Now everyone felt the weight of truly living, of caring for others, of not wasting time on what doesn't matter. I learned to rebuild little by little. I learned to do more with less, to celebrate every small victory, to accept help without shame. I began to value more those who stood by me in the darkest days. I discovered that those who survive the worst carry within them a new strength and a mission, to leave no one alone in the next crisis. If you've come this far with me, you know what I'm talking about. It wasn't easy, it wasn't pretty, but it was worth starting over. The most important thing is not to forget, life can change again at any moment, and this time, we've already learned the way back home, to each other, and goodbye. Over time, I realized that surviving the worst comes with responsibility. It's not just about carrying on pretending nothing happened. People started helping each other more. Many old disputes were left behind. Many people resumed dialogue with those they had drifted apart from. I saw groups of neighbors forming support networks, pastors visiting house to house, doctors providing free care to those who had nothing. I learned that those who stay have a commitment to those who may still fall. Young people, who before only thought about leaving the country, began to value what they had. I saw people investing in gardens, learning to repair what they used to throw away, discovering the pleasure of simple tasks. The children grew up faster, the adults became less arrogant. Even at small neighborhood parties, the atmosphere was different. The fear of the past didn't disappear, but it became a driving force to do things differently. The churches, now filled more with ordinary people than with religious people, became places of listening, There was no longer a division of classes or a demand for perfection. Each person brought their story, their pain, their desire to start over. Prayer became conversation, worship a gathering of survivors. Those who hadn't cried back then cried now, not from sadness, but from relief at still being here. It was in this new routine that I realized that faith isn't just for difficult times, but for every day of rebuilding. Those who have experienced firsthand what it's like to lose everything learn not to lose sight of what truly matters, to be grateful for the rice on their plate, for the roof over their heads, for the embrace of those who remain. Jesus showed me long ago that the danger was falling back into old habits, into coldness, into indifference. Now I truly understand. It was time to hold on to this lesson and not let time erase what I had learned with so much pain. Finally, I discovered that the commitment of those who survived is to ensure that no one gets lost again. It's about being willing to help, listen, and share, because the next crisis may come, but those who learn together will never let go of each other again. No one's hand. When I look back and see everything we've been through, I can only think of one thing: don't let time erase the lesson. All of Mexico has changed. Hunger, fear, emptiness, all of that has marked every family, every street, every neighborhood. But what truly remains is the certainty that no one can do it alone and that God never abandons those who are willing to help and be helped. Life has returned, but in a different way. Some people are rebuilding their homes, families are starting over, people are learning to do again what was once automatic. But the fear of forgetting hits hard from time to time, because human beings tend to revert to old habits, to pretend nothing happened, to let go of what hurts. To remember, don't let that happen to you. If you survived, be grateful. If you lost someone, don't just cling to the pain, but also to the desire to care for those who remain. If you learned something during this time, share it. Tell your story, listen to those who need it, help those who are alone. Now is not the time to keep it all to yourself. Now is the time to transform pain into compassion, memory into action, faith into deeds. And if you've listened this far, do one thing: comment below what has changed for you. Tell us how you faced this difficult time and ask for prayers if you'd like. Share this message with someone who needs hope, who has lost their way, who still thinks everything is the same. Don't let it pass you by. We all deserve to start over with a lighter heart. Jesus taught me long ago that true change comes when we stop thinking only of ourselves and learn to truly love. Never forget that, even if the world returns to normal. May God bless your home, your family, your life, and remember, what we learned in the darkness should be a light for many people. Now is the time to awaken. Today is always the time.